So I'm back in the same place, completely different time of day. It's currently 9:30 at night. So let's talk Google I/O. So let's start with stats. So Google are touting 1 billion active users, which is absolutely fantastic. 78.9% smartphone share for 2013, compared to Apple's 15.5%. And a 62% tablet share for 2013 as well, compared to Apple's 36%, which is really impressive considering Apple had the majority of the market in like 2012, 2011. And so already Google is grabbing that back via Android. Obviously, one of the big things was wearables this year at Google I/O. We had a bit about it last year and it was really quite impressive. And Google claims that we glance at our smartphones 125 times a day. And basically what they want to bring is Google Now to your wrist, to make it easier for you to actually check on your notifications, check on your email, check on your messages, and not have to rely on your phone all the time. Voice commands are the same as Google Now, so just say OK Google and it will do everything you need it to do. Exactly the same as Google Now in terms of swiping, so you can swipe from the left, swipe from the right, to get rid of your Google Now notifications and stuff like that, pull up, pull down, all those other funky things you get with Google Now. And obviously with it kind of being like Google Now, you get things like weather and flights and traffic and messages and reminders and all that other kind of stuff. And the best thing of it is it's all part of an SDK that third-party apps can utilize. So for instance, like Twitter and Pinterest and things like that, Pinterest lol, but things like Twitter and Vine and all these apps that you use every day can utilize the notifications within within Android Wear to actually send notifications to your Android Wear device. LG is bringing out a G Watch which has a smartphone processor inside and goes on pre-order today. Today being the 25th of June. Now, in keeping with Apple's announcement, Google's announced a thing called Google Fit, which is Android's answer to exercise and health tracking, basically like Apple's health app. It's going to basically track everything that you do if you let it do it. So sleeping and things like what you eat and how much exercise you do and that kind of stuff. And it's a universal API for everybody to use for that kind of stuff, which is really good. So it means things like Nike Plus, Nike Fuel and stuff like that can interact with other third-party apps. It doesn't have to necessarily go through Nike's dedicated Nike Plus app. Then there's things like Nike, Withings, Intel Runkeeper and a variety of other fitness companies that are already involved with Android Fit, which is absolutely amazing. The other thing that Google announced was Android Auto, which is basically in-car just general management in terms of calls and texts and music and everything else that you get from a car. A bit like Apple touted with their interaction with their car stuff. But one of the cool things is it's actually not going to be running in the dashboard. So you're not going to have a dedicated machine that's going to be running things on the dashboard. It's actually running in your phone and it mirrors directly from the phone to there, which means you're going to have constant updates and it's going to be tied to your phone, which is really good. Google, Audi, Honda, General Motors, Hyundai and the chipmaker Nvidia have already been collaborating to bring Android safely to cars in 2014. This is reported by Engadget. Engadget, by the way, is going to be all my links because pretty much they do a really good job of summing it all up. I don't really like Engadget as a general news source because they bang on too much about other bullshit I don't care about. But nevertheless, I'm going to link pretty much to every single article they've done on it. It's going to be completely voice enabled and it's going to be contextually based as well. So for instance, if I'm outside a cinema, it'll tell me cinema times. If I'm outside a bowling alley, for instance, it'll tell me the opening times of that. Same with restaurants, all those other kind of things. It'll tell me opening times and just general stuff like that, how busy it is, reviews, etc, etc, which is really quite cool. APIs in Android Auto are also shared with Android Wear. So pretty much, again, like we've seen with Android Wear, third parties can just kind of use that API and push any notifications to it that they want. Car makers like Acura, Alfa Romeo, Bentley, Chevy, Chrysler, Dodge, Honda, Hyundai, VW, Subaru and Maserati will have models running out the assembly line this year. So that's 2014, which is really quite cool. Now, one of the other things that Google announced in terms of Androidiness was material design. And basically that's going to come to Android and Chrome OS and the web so that everything is running Material UI, which is really cool. So it's a unified interface across all devices. We're talking Chrome OS, we're talking Android, we're talking Android Wear, we're talking everything that Google does in terms of web apps and in terms of physical devices is going to have the same unified interface, which they're calling Material Design. There's already some stuff out at the moment for developers in terms of how they implement Material Design and how it's going to look, which is really quite cool. And it also brings with it new animations and shadows and depth. And obviously you can see as it looks currently on the screen, I'll put something up, and it does look really cool. It does look a little bit Windows 8ified, But again, with Apple and Microsoft and all these other companies, and Ubuntu as well to a certain extent, all that kind of flopped, they're bringing a unified interface to everything, which is really quite cool. In terms of actual Android, pure Android, we're talking about Android L release, which they're actually not going to call anything. I think they're probably still coming up with an actual proper name for it. Maybe Lollipop, maybe Luma or something. It's usually something sweet based, but they might be ditching that because they might just think, well, they were bored of that now. And obviously it ties in with Material Design. It brings with it flatter UI, simpler icons. One of the really great things, which iOS has kind of already had for a while anyway, is lock screen notifications. So for instance, if you have text, they'll come on your screen. If you have things like your tweets and stuff like that, they come up on the screen as opposed to in the notification center at the top, which is really quite cool. Out of the way notifications are also coming like iOS, so if you're in the middle of a game and someone tries to call you, it'll come up at the top and you can choose to decline that if you want to. Same with tweets and other things like that, which is really sweet, which is kind of very, very good that iOS had it and that Android's going to implement it on top. Another really cool thing that could be a little bit dodgy, but you can disable it, is a thing called Trusted Environments, which will disable lock screen security if, for instance, your Moto 360 is on your wrist and your phone's in your pocket, you can get it out. Or if you're in a specific trusted location. So for instance, if I went into my home and I was living on my own, or I trusted the person that I live with, it would automatically have my phone, so I didn't have to enter a lock code, which is really quite cool. For instance, say you had your own dedicated office in the middle of nowhere or something, and you just, when you got to the office, you didn't have to fanny around with having to type in a passcode every time you bring out your phone, which is really quite cool. There's another cool thing called ART, Runtime ART, in big bold letters. It brings with it faster load times, it runs quicker and increased battery life, and the way it can do this is basically it's not going to decompress apps every time it loads them, which is really quite sweet. Project Volta is also going to bring with it something a bit like Sony's stamina mode. So it's going to hold off energy intensive stuff whilst you're when your battery's really, really low, so maybe 10%, it'll disable auto updates and it'll disable all the other funky things as well, which is really quite cool. I think we've kind of needed this within Android, stock Android, for a while now. And you can beta test all of this on the Nexus 5 and the Nexus 7 starting tomorrow, which will be the 26th. So by the time this video will have already gone up, you will be able to beta test it today, which would be fantastic. Android One is another thing that Google announced, which is basically their idea of low-end smartphones, basically for the developing world. So what Google are going to do is they're going to design the hardware, they're going to give that to manufacturers, and they're going to say, here, manufacture this shit for us. So they're going to speak to the likes of Motorola, well, which they are already partly owning already, but they're going to speak to the likes of HTC and Samsung and say, look, here's the software, here's what we want you to build, go away and build it. We'll give you the spec, we'll give you how much memory it's supposed to have, how good the camera's going to be, and all other shit as well. It's going to be completely pure Android, it's going to be cheap as chips, and they are going to bring with it obviously minimum standards as well. So minimum standard spec CPU, minimum standard spec camera and such like as well. And say again, all designed for the developing world, India, China perhaps, the Gambia and and Africa and other places like that. That's very, very potentially stereotypical and racist, but hey ho, there we go. Android apps are also going to come to Chromebook, so that's really quite sweet. It's not necessarily needed, but they demoed some weird Vine app, well, not weird Vine app, the Vine app within Chromebook. Quite cool, not necessary. And it's also going to bring with it photo notifications from your phone, so if your battery's low, it's going to show that. Calls and texts will also come through on your Chromebook, so if you are that way inclined and you want to really use the Chromebook full time, then you're sorted. Google TV was another thing that was touted, but not the Google TV Evolve, which was a separate division. It's tying in again with Android completely. So it's going to have that Material Design UI, which is really quite sweet. And it is kind of basically what Chromecast is at the moment. It's going to be similar to Apple TV and Amazon Fire TV. It's going to have Google specific content like Play Movies and Play content. It will also have our third-party apps, so things like Netflix, maybe Amazon Video, and bits and pieces like that. It's going to be card-based, like Google now. One of the cool things is that any Android phone or smartwatch running the Wear platform can be used as a remote, which is really quite sweet. It's going to be available on games consoles and media streamers, including something by Razer, which looks really cool. And it's going to be on all Sony 4K and smart TVs in 2015. It's also going to be on some TVs made by Sharp and Philips by next year. So that's going to be quite sweet, and it means that you're kind of going to have, like, smart TVs aren't going to be dedicated by the manufacturer, like Samsung are going to create their own shit and then have to update it every year. Android or Google is going to maintain that and update it, and that's going to be really quite sweet. But yes, Razer's going to make this funky micro console thing. Not too sure how it's going to work. They're kind of going to do some dedicated games for it. A little bit like a Steam box, but running Android. It's a little bit weird. They're not very open with it at the moment. It kind of just exists as a kind of like a photo and an image, but there's no real word yet on specs or anything like that. Google Drive will allow users to have unlimited data storage for $10 a month, which is really quite sweet. And it's also going to let you encrypt data within Google Drive. So that means you've not got any prying eyes going into it and things like that, which is quite sweet. If you went to Google I/O this year, you already know all this, but free stuff for developers was a thing called Cardboard, which is like a virtual reality thing. Really quite sweet. They got a free LG G or Samsung Gear Live, which is their smartwatches, and when Moto 360 comes out, they're also going to be giving one of those. But Google I/O tickets are really quite expensive, so it's kind of like, well, that's kind of like a, not necessarily an added bonus, that's kind of half the ticket price is just on those alone. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The light is fading. I'm not overly impressed this year. I mean, the only thing I do like is the fact that they've got unified design, which they're kind of copying from near as damn it everybody in the tech industry at the moment, but that's quite cool. It doesn't mean I'm going to move everything to Google properly. I mean, I do use YouTube, I do use Gmail, I do use Google Contacts and Google Calendar, and I use Android. But equally, I use an Apple device, I use Windows. There's no way I could use my primary device. I can move away from Windows or Mac. So it's kind of like, at the moment, it's like, well, I do have a Chromebook. It's a piece of shit. I hate it. For businesses, I think it's really going to be quite cool because it's going to be unified. It's going to be really cool. Android TV, not a fan because there's about 1,000,001 different platforms out there, and personally for me, I'd much rather have a home theatre PC running Boxy or running anything else. I can run any app I want, running a Raspberry Pi or running on any device I want, than have an Android TV that's some dedicated box that costs me an extra 50 quid. I'm going to take up an extra load of stuff and space and power and everything else like that. Android Wear is really quite cool. I think it's a little bit gimmicky, but when Moto 360 comes out, I think I will buy one because it's only going to be about 150 quid, which is going to be really cheap. So I don't know, I think that's kind of quite cool. Android Auto is quite sweet. I don't own a car, I don't drive. Is it something I would want in my car if I did drive? In the UK, probably not, especially down in the wilds of Cornwall, because it won't have any of the stuff that I actually need. If I lived in the US, perhaps, but I'm not. If I lived in the US and I lived in a major city, I wouldn't bother with the car anyway. I would just have public transport because it's going to be connected enough and it's not going to matter unless I'm out in the sticks somewhere, like I am currently in Cornwall, then I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. Android L is pretty sweet. It's okay. There's nothing there that I really like apart from the battery life increase. That's really quite sweet. But apart from that, there's nothing really that's really like jumping out at me and saying, oh yeah, I really want that. Android Fit is really interesting. Now, I really like this is the fact that Google are bringing with it an unified API that can do everything, so that the likes of Nike and Fitbit and the Nike, is it the Nike Fuel, the Fuel Band Plus, whatever bullshit it's called. Is it Joomla, something beginning with a J? I can't remember what the hell it's called now. Those kind of things can all tie in together, including apps, including Runkeeper, including Nike Plus, including hopefully Strava, who seem to want to be really tight in it in terms of kind of keeping it siloed off from everybody else. Same with MyFitnessPal, which I use for keeping track of what I eat, because that's really good. It's pretty much the best database for food, but it isn't the best database for exercise. I use Strava for cycling. I use Fitbit to keep hold of my my steps every day and sleeping patterns. And really, what I need is an all-in-one app that does all that. I mean, they do all individually do that, apart from MyFitnessPal and Strava, which don't do sleep, and I don't think Strava does any actual food intakes. But things like Fitbit can do all those, but their databases are pretty shit. So I'd much rather have dedicated apps that do the things well and then talk to each other via a unified API that exists within Apple's environment and Google's environment, which actually they're going to have in both environments. They're going to have the API open for Apple devices and Android devices, which is really quite cool. This is what I was talking about with Apple's unified home interface. I really want to see an industry standard that does health apps and healthy stuff. Either Android or either Google or Apple will head that up, but it becomes an industry standard and everybody uses it. It's got similar APIs and it kind of talks to each other really well. Same with home automation, same with things like Nest that talks to everything in a simplified industrial standard that everybody uses, the universal standard that everybody uses, which is really quite sweet. Same with Android wearables. I want them to all talk to each other in the same sort of way, same API, because it's a pain in the padded ass as a customer, because then you're tied into one environment and you can't do fuck all. It's like the original Sony smartwatch was crap because you had to use Sony specific software and you could only use Sony specific software on Android devices, and it was generally shit. But yes, apart from that, I shall catch you in a later video.